Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Aaron Rutledge, he, him pronouns, and I have the privilege of serving as Western Oregon's strategic leader. And today we're going to be talking about early alerts and the approach that Western has taken around their early alerts process to really help think about where we've been, but also a direction of where we might want to go as we think about supporting students in this process. First, I want to actually talk about kind of this concept around coordinated care and really thinking about these three pillars that come together to make up this framework, right? So part of it is the technology, right? So Navigate 360 and how you configure and set up the technology to support the work that you're doing, but more so thinking about how that overlays with the processes. So again, thinking about early alert processes and the people that you have involved in the work, right? So again, kind of connecting the three in this broader framework of coordinated care. So what that looks like in practice is really three major kind of ways and features. So on the one hand, you have a progress report, which is a proactive mechanism for us to ask faculty around how their students are doing in their courses. Right, so whether it is by a selection of students or by a selection of courses or some combination of the two, we have identified a group of students that we ask faculty for feedback on. Now this can be, I'm concerned about a student in terms of their engagement. It could also be a kudos or a referral. But again, allowing faculty who see students day to day able to kind of provide that feedback. They are providing that feedback as an alert. Right? So that alert is a way for us to identify kind of the reason or the flag around a student. So like I said, most of the time that's going to come from a progress report, but that can also be raised ad hoc. So any faculty and also any staff member could also raise an alert around a student. And again, that could be I'm concerned about a student for whatever reason. It could also be I want to give some kudos or I want to refer them to an office or a support resource on campus. And so again, kind of thinking about those two kind of pillars as either a way to get that information out. And then lastly, are cases. So cases have to generate from an alert. You can't just kind of have a case kind of out there. So again, depending on how you have the site configured, alerts are the mechanism to generate that case, but not all alerts have to generate a case. Right, so sometimes alerts can truly just be an FYI. And so again, kind of thinking about what that means in terms of the approach that Western Oregon wants to take. So when we think about an early alert pipeline, right, this is the expectation that we typically have, right? So faculty submits an alert. The student then receives intervention. They get information. They are informed about next steps. And then we're able to kind of understand and quantify the impact of that work, right? So pretty straightforward. What tends to happen, though, is something like this, right? Faculty still submits the alert. Lots of stuff happens in the interim. And then maybe we quantify the alert, right? So there's lots of kind of handoffs. There's also lots of questions along the way, right? So faculty sometimes questions around like, where do I send an alert? Like, why am I submitting it? Who are these batch of students that are on this list? You know, students being like, why did I get this email? Like, why is it kind of tutoring reaching out or academic support reaching out? You know, for staff also thinking about how do I like manage and triage all of this work? And then obviously administrators wanting to understand like, well, did it have an impact? Did we do the thing that we wanted to do? Right, so lots of questions along the way. And so for us and the work that we often do with partners, we like to think about how do we, again, while we may never truly get to the straight line, kind of that straightforward process, how do we get closer to that? And we really think about it in this kind of more end-to-end pipeline approach. And so the various stages of an early alert process that we like to kind of talk about and work with our partners around fall into this plan, act, and evaluate kind of framework, right? So, and I talked a little bit about some of this in previous sessions, but if we don't first have a plan and set goals around what are we trying to accomplish, and it's going to be very difficult to then have, again, a closer to that straightforward linear approach that we saw on the previous slide, right? So if we don't know kind of what our strategic goals or what specific objectives we have, it is then going to be really difficult for us to have clear alert reasons that are built out, right? It's going to then be difficult to have clear interventions and triage steps if we don't know what we're trying to accomplish. And so it's really, really critical that we think about this plan portion of the conversation. In the ACT, this is, again, the work that happens as part of an early alert process. So again, thinking about what is your collection mechanism. So this is also thinking about not only the alert reasons, but the timing of when we want to collect, right? Collecting early alerts at week 10 of the term might not be the best timing, right? And so again, thinking about what does that mean is going to be really, really important. But also, how do we encourage participation? How do we incentivize it? How do we support people through the process? But also, what does accountability look like in that process? Not just for faculty submitting alerts, but also for the staff then supporting kind of on the back end. And really that being a shared process. But also thinking about what are some of our protocols, right? So if I have a referral to tutoring, that pretty clearly should be then referred and triaged over to tutoring to then manage, right? But that is not always clear, right? So again, thinking about some alert reasons around engagement or attendance, right? Is that something that should fall within the faculty's purview, right? To then kind of do classroom management around. And then kind of thinking about advisors and support staff when we start seeing themes, is that when kind of that tier and that group of people connect and really intervene. And so again, thinking about some of those kind of steps will be helpful. And then lastly is the intervention pathway, right? So thinking about what is our outreach and intervention plan? Like what steps or what behaviors are we trying to address? Again, if any of the alerts create cases, what does case management look like, right? So what are our expectations in the sense of you should have initial outreach within 72 hours, right? You should then be resolving things kind of throughout the following weeks. So that way we can close the loop in the work that we're doing. And then lastly, as we move into the final step, this is the evaluation piece, right? So again, what were some of the outcomes that we wanted to assess and inflect change in? And so again, thinking about what that could look like during that process. So we're going to spend most of our time actually kind of in this arena today, so the ACT arena. But I encourage y'all, again, as you are thinking about what this could look like even moving forward at Western, there may be some need to come back to this planning kind of piece down the road. So again, if we think about the collection portion of the ACT, some of the things that we always talk about with our partners is, again, thinking about having very targeted and very focused and concise alert reasons, because again, they need to be actionable, insightful, and measurable, right? Part of the value of this is that it actually is very clear for faculty that are raising alerts to then say like, yes, oh, this is the thing I am concerned about. It also then, on the back end, when we get into some of the intervention steps, can also help us really be clear around like, this is the next step in that process, right? Like, here's the intervention pathway, here's how this needs to be triaged. And so again, thinking about what this could look like. So here's a couple of sample alert reasons. But again, kind of making sure that you have some very clear, like if you start to think about, I always say, if you start to think about like, well, I don't know if I should select this one or this one, that is a good kind of reflective moment of like, okay, well, if I can't select one, kind of what does that then mean for others on campus? And so for Western, most of your alerts are really geared towards progress reports. So you can see here all of the alerts that you'll have active and available for progress reports. So everything from an abrupt change in academic performance, engagement, and attendance, right? So some of those moments where it's, again, something out of the blue happened typically, right? So for me, this really indicates that something is going on in the student's life that we then need to dig into and find out like, you were attending everything the first 4 weeks. What has now happened that you are now kind of stepped away? Also kind of next to that is general concerns about attendance and engagement. We also have a graduate student academic concern that would then obviously, based on that, would then be triaged to kind of graduate advising and graduate kind of schools. We have two different kudos, right? So one being around great work overall versus one being around improved performance. So again, helping provide some positive affirmation for students if they are, again, overall doing really, really great or have started to make some strides, right? Like I think about like midterm to final grade period, right? Like that being a great kudos moment for the second one. We also have a referral to tutoring, and then the student has never attended is the last alert reason. Now, in terms of kind of, again, we talked about progress reports being one mechanism versus ad hoc being the other. All of your progress report alerts are also available to be raised at an ad hoc basis, but we only have one other ad hoc alert, which is just kind of an other type of alert. So something that, you know, to think about and again have conversations around is, does this feel right? Right? Do we feel like we have a comprehensive list for the progress reports and things that, again, faculty would understand and have clarity into? But are there also other ad hoc alerts that we might be thinking about or need to build into this process that, again, maybe faculty don't have insight into, but other staff advisors, kind of people that have a relationship with the student, may be able to kind of help us, because the other, while a kind of catch-all, is not the easiest to triage and scale, right? Because it does require you to really dig into the comments in a very, like, I don't want to say time-consuming way, but kind of time-consuming way, right? So you have to kind of understand and get into kind of the nuances of this one. All right, so something to kind of think about, I would say, as y'all are continuing to build out this process. I don't know, Paige or Jennifer, if y'all would add anything. Yeah, so, right, so this kind of student never attended given the new administrative drop policy. Maybe one that, again, we had it served a purpose, but now it's, let's eliminate some confusion because there are new things that exist to get at that, right? So, so I think for the most part, I actually do think this is a comprehensive. I actually think this column is the one that is a little sparse. And so, right, and again, as we think about, right, referral to tutoring is something that faculty will know, right? Like if you actually need academic support, and my class also offers tutoring, SI, math lab, right, like all those things, versus there may be other like referrals to the Career Center, to other resource offices that staff know, but faculty might not have insight into. They may, but maybe less likely, because again, you can always submit it ad hoc, even if you're a faculty member. But I think this is the column that I would continue to think about. And again, based on some of the conversations that we've had yesterday around coordinated care, like I actually think this is kind of the next step in some of this early alert journey at Western. So the other thing, so I actually already talked about some of this, right? So again, other considerations is some of the referral pieces. And also as we get into thinking about the student app and the student engagement experience, what are some hand-raised reasons, right? So oftentimes, you know, faculty and staff may have insight into what students need help with, but students typically know themselves what they need help with. And the ability to do that in kind of a digital nomad way, in kind of a digital first way, we've actually seen a decent amount, because I will say that it feels a little anonymous for students, even though it is connected to them, but there is a lower barrier to entry and a little less risk connected with that of being able to raise my hand through an app versus telling an advisor or telling a support person that like, hey, I need help with X thing, even though the end result is still the same, right? We connect them to the resource that they need. So those are just some additional considerations that I would think about as we continue down this process together. So as I also talked about, part of this is also thinking about the timing of these alerts, right? And so here's kind of an example from Seton Hall, but they really focused on their first and second year courses, kind of their heavy kind of entry courses. But one of the things that they actually were mindful of as they thought about priorities and triaging is that while all the alerts were really available for faculty, they actually only cared around particular alerts at points in time in the term. So it's not that absenteeism left the list or that we didn't care about absenteeism, But by week 4, 8, and 10, we actually don't care as much, because at that point you've missed, like, if we haven't addressed that concern early, like, there's already ripple effects that will probably start to showcase, right? Like, your participation is actually going to go down, your assignment grades are probably going to be lower, right? Like, your midterm grade, if you're still not showing up, your midterm grade is probably going to be low, unless you just are really knowledgeable about the content and you have found a way to kind of teach yourself, right? So actually thinking about at points in time in the term, certain alerts may actually be the priority in terms of what you're intervening around. And some schools have actually even like taken certain alerts off. So again, kind of narrowing down what faculty could submit. But you could still kind of have it all available. But again, midway through, because they are a semester school, midway through they're like, we actually only are caring about midterm grades and helping rectify, so that way you can get a passing grade. And so really thinking about like, you need academic support to pass, or there is no turning back, and right, we need to be thinking about withdrawing you from the class before the deadline, right? Like that actually is then the work that they are doing. For this approach, right, it actually kind of allows them to think about some of their staff capacity, right, in a different way. And also, again, being very clear with faculty around like, these are the things that we are doing, and this is our priority, and here's kind of our step and kind of our approach in the process to make sure that everyone is on the same page. So at Western, again, as we think about the goal of your early alerts process, right, the main goal is around increasing persistence, right? Like that is typically why any school is launching an early alert process. Right, and so again, thinking about how we continue to move students from one term to the next. But also, kind of a secondary goal tends to be around academic performance, right? We want less students to kind of fall into the lower GPA bands. And so, again, kind of thinking about how we align timing and or student populations with that. So right now, you have progress reports kind of going out at weeks 3 and 5. And those are kind of connected to the high support students, so typically thinking about students with low high school GPAs and some other indicators that we are leveraging, and then also all of your student athletes. So those are the two populations that Western is leveraging. And kind of on the reactive side, right, so we talked about some of the ad hoc pieces. Progress reports being more proactive, reactive. At any point in time, a faculty member or staff, even if they are not teaching any of these students, my hunch is most will have a handful of them in each of their classes. But you know, there could be faculty members that don't have any of these students in their classes. But if they still have a concern, they can still also submit those kind of on a reactive basis. So, and again, following the same process and strategy that we have, but again, I will say kind of no major push around like, what are we doing around kudos kind of at an institutional level, right? Until it tends to be pretty kind of reactive. So once we've kind of identified the group of students, we know the alert reasons, it then is also important to think about what is our intervention pathway, right? Like how do we best serve a student? Because part of what we want to achieve in this is one, some staff efficiency, right? So thinking about how do we streamline our work to make sure that we are getting the end result that we need with our students, but also providing some consistency, right? It is not helpful if we have, one person doing one thing, person 2 doing another thing, person 3 doing another thing. As you can kind of see here, right? In this example, there was an assignment concern, right? So think about this as like your general concern about engagement and attendance alert. And here are 3 different advisors, and as you can see, they're doing 3 different things. Right? And so that makes it very difficult to understand what is actually the best approach for us to get the end result that we want, right? If all 3 of these advisors, if their students ended up getting and changing the behavior around this assignment concern, it's actually very difficult for us to know, well, which one actually made the right impact? Because it could just be that Tyler's approach of just referring the student to tutoring, if that gets us the same response as all of this with an appointment and an email, like this is actually a good staff saving time, right? Like this actually, if it's still getting us the same end result, maybe we don't need an appointment, right? Like maybe we don't need some of these other communications. But maybe that doesn't actually get us what we need. And so we need to be thinking about, again, what is the consistent approach to also make sure that we are being as effective as we can. And so the only way you can really get to understanding that effectiveness is if we have some consistency that we can then say, yep, we all did this. Here's the change or the impact that we had around these particular alert reasons. Did it do the thing that we wanted or not? Or did it not have as much of an impact as we wanted? And so, great, let's tweak, or maybe let's add something, or let's automate something that we can be setting up. And so, again, as you think about intervention pathways and what you can be doing, here's just kind of an example from Mercy College. And they wanted to dive into, again, what does that pathway look like? And so as you can see on one side, it's all of their alert reasons. And then on the other side, it's all of their interventions, right? So all the things that they could do, right? So as you can see, a number of alert reasons around like grammar or writing skills needing improvement, poor attendance, student hasn't purchased the textbook, also their reading comprehension skills need improvement, right? So a whole number of things, but also some like financial concerns, students doing well. And then on the intervention side, right, they also have things around like providing technical support with Blackboard, reviewing time management techniques, reviewing scores, discussing all of that in follow-up. And so a number of, again, interventions and alert reasons. But what they realized is that actually was a little much, right? It wasn't clear, it wasn't, it was a little too robust in the sense of some of the next steps. And so they started to narrow down. And so again, fewer alert reasons, but they really also realized that a lot of their interventions might have been duplicative. And so how do they, again, create some consistency there? And so they then started to map. Right, so based on the alert reason, what interventions could happen? So as you can see, not the clearest, also hard to assess and understand the effectiveness. And as you can see, some of them also, right, like, again, these two kind of fall into the, we've done a thing, but obviously students are, occasionally not responsive to us. And so that could just happen at any point in time. And then also this withdrawn from the course, I would say is sometimes the right approach, sometimes not the right approach. And so again, obviously that is a case-by-case basis around the intervention. But again, still a little messy. And so where they landed actually is here, right? So again, thinking about how they limit their scope to, again, what is kind of consistently achievable. And so kind of one, the first one was student is doing well in the class, right? They wanted to keep some type of kudos or positive alert. And so that then is just notifying the student of, hey, you're doing really well in the class. Your faculty in this particular course sees that and wanted to let you know about that. Again, low scores are on an assignment or a test. They then decided they wanted to meet with the student to discuss kind of their academic plan for improvement. For the referral to tutoring, they then recommended tutoring and then allowed tutoring to then manage that and provide contact information and set up appointments. Kind of the missing class assignments, discussions, test, and not prepared. They then decided that that was actually connected to the faculty to then review classroom assignments and expectations with the student. Again, for punctuality or attendance issues, they then also kind of use that as a moment to discuss that also with faculty. But again, if they started to see themes, they would pull that together. And then non-academic concerns, similar to your other alert, right? It kind of becomes this broad umbrella. That is something that they also then created a case to then meet with the student around, right? So again, clear list of alert reasons, but also clear next steps that could be articulated and shared broadly across campus of here's what's happening, right? Like here's what's kind of being done as part of the process. It's not just you raise this alert and then it goes into a black box and you have no idea what's happening next, but again, kind of clearly articulating kind of what is available there. So again, kind of coming back to Navigate 360 and how it can support these processes, right? So as I talked about, you can have either an ad hoc alert submitted or an alert submitted via the progress report campaign. From there, any number of these 3 steps can happen, right? So you can have an email go out to the student notifying them, right? And that is the extent, right? For some of them, like the kudos, It is purely just a, hey, you did really well, you're doing really well, you're improving your performance, great job. But you can also potentially, depending on the alert reason, also notify assigned staff members via email, right? So if I'm a coach, again, because athletes are one of your kind of student populations that are included in progress reports, maybe we want to include coaches, right? To kind of let them know that, hey, some of your team has this alert, right? Or is not showing up, or is not engaging in class, right? That is helpful for them to know, especially when we think about eligibility and kind of the other implications that might come out of that. But you can also create a case, right? So again, thinking about the first two kind of notifications really being FYIs, but maybe no other steps are needed. Cases are really allowing us to think about kind of some other follow-up or next step needs to be managed. And so cases are a great way to do that. And so again, as we think about the notifications, it's really thinking about kind of what is outlined by policy, but again, maybe no further documentation is required, versus a case, again, being able to document, oh, we've done outreach, we've had an appointment, we've sent this email or this communication, and having, again, a closure, kind of closing of the loop in terms of this case, this student was referred to tutoring and met with tutoring, right? We discussed next steps. Cases were referred to X, right? So again, all of those case closure reasons being determined by Western and configured in the platform. So, before I kind of go into some of the impacts from prior terms, because I pulled some numbers from fall 23 as well as winter 24, and so we're going to kind of talk about some of those. But before I go into any of that, any questions around kind of the alerts process or how things have functioned at Western, or things that could be clarified? Yeah, so again, kind of in summary, right, part of it is historically we have used this for course-based insights, right? So understanding how students are performing in a course, concerns that faculty may have. But as we think about expanding the coordinated care network, as we bring new units in, especially non-academic units, what does that then mean in terms of our approach and our strategy around how to leverage early alerts, right? Progress reports still being leveraged in the course and faculty space, but again, thinking about referrals to kind of the care team, referrals to basic needs, referrals to the career center, right? Leadership office, all of those. I often will talk about and share examples of, right, so a kudos that automatically goes out to students who are returning from a leave of absence or who have, or are on academic probation. That is truly a, you've got this, right, like we believe in you, and that happening at week 1 in the term, right? So that being part of a strategy, but also thinking about how do we build in opportunities to identify students who aren't engaged or might not have a sense of belonging, right, and have referrals to a leadership office or an engagement office or, you know, residence life or orientation, right? Like there are ways that we can also, because I recall from my days advising student organizations where, you know, we had the same students over and over again, like that we tap and we go to because we're like, oh, well, you'll sit on this committee or you'll be, right, like this tutor or this leader. And again, it's the same group. And so again, thinking about how do we kind of diversify and expand that population, and like what would it look like if I'm the director of residence life and I'm about to open up kind of RA selection and I just have a list of students that have this referral to student leadership type of alert reason that I can then outreach to and invite to an information session or invite to apply to be an RA and things like that, right? So again, it's thinking about how do you use the early alerts process to also not just be negative, right? Like it is not just about kind of a deficit mindedness, but also this broader kind of approach to again use it to connect students behind the scenes to other offices and or resources that are available. All right, so let's talk about kind of what some of this has looked like in the past. And so like I said, I have pulled some insights and numbers from fall 23 and winter 24 because it is, you know, kind of the closest to where we are right now, right, in terms of really just looking back a year ago. And so one of the things that I will also talk about and kind of talk through is again, thinking about each step of that process. So collection, triage, and intervention. Some of the things that may kind of spark some thoughts or a light bulb in your head is, right, like, are we in the right spot with all of those, right? Like, are we actually collecting information on the right group of students, right? Are we, again, we've talked a little bit about some of the alert reasons already and maybe needing to kind of get rid of the student not attending, because you'll see that on one of the slides that it was actually one of your top alert reasons. And so it might not need to be there anymore because faculty should not be selecting it because we now have an administrative drop process. But again, thinking about what is some of the, again, outcomes and the goals of our early alert process, and do we feel like we are meeting that? And so hopefully, again, kind of as you think about this cycle, so kind of the 5 steps in this pipeline, we've now evaluated, and so then what does this mean as we move forward? And again, thinking about even winter 25 and spring 25 and summer 25 if we want to make changes. So fall 23, so you had about 405 total students included in the progress report campaign, so unique students. And again, that's across the entire term. So again, thinking about different progress reports going out at different points in time. You had a 50% response rate against the total number of requests. So again, students, because we were looking at NCAA students and high support students, they are taking multiple classes, so there are multiple requests going out to multiple faculty across the multiple courses that they are taking. Some faculty responded, at large. Other faculty did not, right? So that then kind of leads obviously to this 50% response rate. But in general, we got feedback on pretty much all students, right? It might not have been 100%, but we only had 18 students that did not get any response at all from any faculty member, right? So if you're in 4 classes, that means of the 4 requests, 0 came back, right? This is always a number that I like to monitor pretty closely. Because at least if we have some feedback, and while yes, we can still improve on the 50%, you will see when we get to winter that did shoot up a little bit. And so we are moving in the right direction with response rate. But at least if we have some feedback in the courses, we can use that kind of as a barometer. And again, the more courses that we have feedback on, right, we can understand, is this a trend or a one-off, right? Like, if you only have an alert in your math class, maybe it's because you just don't like math, right? Versus you have the same alert across 4 of your classes, right? It's just okay, we have a bigger kind of thing going on that we need to address. And so again, this is always something because we truly have no insight around some of these students. So again, kind of thinking about monitoring this group is something that I often think about. When we look at this group, so the 405 students and their persistence to winter 24, had about a 93.4% persistence rate to the next term, which is 3.7% higher than your regular bachelor's degree seeking student body. So again, helpful. One of the things that I shared with the group yesterday is, some of this may be a little inflated by your student athletes, right? So student athletes generally, because of their sense of belongingness and their connection to the institution, typically, nationwide, retain at higher rates. It's only when they get kicked off the team or they are no longer an athlete that they become a bit of a retention concern. And so some of this may also be a little inflated because of that population. But that also gets, and kind of begs the question too, as I talked about earlier, right? Have we honed in on kind of the right student population? And are we, again, as we think about the students we lose term over term, are they included in the progress report? And I'll give you a hint. A large majority of them are not included in the progress reports right now. And so again, thinking about how we refine even our population and the students that we're collecting feedback on to then get kind of more of that population included. And so again, that'll be future conversations for y'all to have. But again, most likely I do not see student athletes going away from this population because typically, because of eligibility and all this stuff, we need that feedback, we need to understand. But the other group, which is the high support, I think we just need to expand that bucket and that population a little bit. But in terms of the top alerts, as you can see, at least in fall, the general concerns around engagement, attendance was your top. So we had 104 submissions around this. The next top one was actually your kudos, right? So both the doing kind of great and then improving. So this is always really nice to see, right? Because then that, to me, indicates that faculty recognize that this is not just a kind of negative tool, that it actually can be a way for you to provide some positive affirmation. The third one was around abrupt change, and everything else kind of fell below that 20 alert. So these are kind of the top three. Of that, right, so again, you take 405 minus 18, that gets you your 383. But this is actually a really helpful number too, as you think about kind of the total number of faculty submitting alerts. And again, providing feedback that is connected to an alert reason. And then on the far column, which is the impact, I typically always like to look at both persistence, right, if that is our overall goal, but then also looking at some of the academic pieces, right? So thinking about earned credits and GPA performance. And for this GPA performance, I decided to do trends in GPA, so kind of difference between cumulative and term. But you could also just look at what was their term GPA, what was kind of the overall cumulative GPA. And so, think about what that could look like for y'all. But overall, as you can see, not much of a difference, right, between getting feedback and not getting feedback, right? And so again, for me, what that also helps to support is that I think some of our student population is a little off, right? Because what I would love to see, and generally what we would expect to see, and again, this 18 is smaller, right? So again, that is something to kind of keep in mind. But generally, we would expect and see, right, like the difference here not being that. Right, because what that tells me is that it actually didn't matter that we got feedback on a student if they were struggling or not. Same thing with, again, like slight difference in earned credits. So the students with feedback did actually have a little bit more. But while it's not on the slide, their credit completion ratio actually was about the same. So in general, also kind of not having the same intended impact. And again, about the same outcomes around GPA trends. And so again, thinking about what this is telling us, I've talked about the student population, but also part of this could also be thinking about, based on some of these alert reasons, right? So if general concerns is our top one, like what is the next step in that process, right? So what are the kind of interventions or action items that we're taking? So if you go back to the Mercy example where we had all the crazy lines and then the kind of clear linear lines from one thing, right? So is there something that may need to tweak a little bit here? And again, I kind of separate those two out because I think some of it could also just be the students that might need our support and need our kind of help are just, we don't know. Like we just don't know. And so what does that then mean? If we could have the right intervention plan and like the right steps, but it's just not directed and deployed to the right populations. So just some things to think about there. In winter, so again, as we kind of continue on, right, a little bit higher number of students, so 436 total students, but we did see a higher response rate to the total number of requests. So about 57.1, so pretty good jump, which is great. Still right around 23 total students that didn't get a response at all. As we move into, again, looking at the persistence from winter to spring, high persistence rate, also higher than the institutional average for bachelor's degree students. So again, same trends here. Again, this is always a number that I'm looking at as we think about kind of the no response. Again, general concerns around engagement is your top alert reason, right? And so thinking about what that could look like, and again, what we're doing as part of that and how we continue to tell the story there. The student never attended, so that is again the one that we're probably going to get rid of because we now have this administrative drop. That was your number 2 at 69. So again, may start to see that shift as we move forward. But we also saw a big jump up for this referral to tutoring, right? That was not one. We had a handful in the fall. We now have a much higher number, right? And this is one, again, as we think about the referral out, we have a very clear intervention step connected to that, right? So what happens then for the students that were referred, right, and actually doing a breakdown of students that were referred that then went to tutoring versus those that did not, right? Looking at some of those outcomes could be really, really helpful to, again, understand it and give us some insights into what these referrals are actually doing to the students on our campus. And again, as we're thinking about expanding additional referrals, could be a good kind of foundation moment for that. Again, also seeing high number of kudos, and then abrupt change drop down. I did include this one just because it was so clear. It was a very top 3 on the last one, but again, dropped below 20 on this one, but just wanted to include it there. Again, higher response rate, so again, higher number of faculty that are submitting. So again, we're seeing a good uptick there. But I will also say, right, we're seeing similar impact kind of trends here, right? So kind of a similar outcomes for both students with feedback and without feedback. So both on the credits, obviously, this one is, I will say, the most, that's almost a full course of difference. I will say in this round, the students with feedback, their credit completion ratio was actually higher, so I do think there was a little bit of a shift there. But again, as we look at GPA and the persistence, those two metrics being very similar. And I think some of that, again, is just connected to your student athletes are just naturally persisting at higher rates. And so it's really thinking about, and I told some members yesterday of the team, I actually would probably separate out and look at the same metrics, but separate out student athletes versus your high support students, because I actually think that might be where you can start to narrow in to see, because my hunch would actually be that your high support students may actually, you might see some difference. So that is, again, kind of winter. And so again, in summary for me, right, we are heading kind of in the right direction from a response rate perspective. I think the fact that people are using this as a referral tool, as a kudos tool, is really, really helpful. More faculty are getting familiar with early alerts. But I think as we think about some next steps, it is truly around what is some of the student population. And I would actually think about doing a little bit of a deeper dive, separating out the NCAA student athletes from the high support to see if we see some difference here. Because while my hunch is that I think that's what's going on, if we actually see a difference, like that continues to reinforce to me that we just need to expand that high support student population. And then again, if we're seeing that persistence shifts, if we're seeing earned credit shifts with that population, again, kind of using that as justification there. Any thoughts, questions, reactions? So the question was kind of the process around how to actually get to some of the persistence numbers and using reports. So yes, using the progress report campaigns report, because that will give you responded or not responded. And then for this analysis, we were looking at the macro level across all progress report students. But yes, very easily you could separate out and add a filter that kind of says like not in kind of student athletes, or again, whether it's kind of a category or a tag, kind of however we're identifying those students in the platform. Because yes, most likely you actually probably are seeing some pretty significant shifts and differences around these impact metrics, which again, just because I have run an analysis like this a number of times, and so I'm going to assume Western students are very similar to a lot of other students that are in need of support kind of across the country, is that probably will provide some data-informed justification around this actually being a more impactful process for your high support students. And again, we just need to expand that population beyond some of the like high school GPA. Again, thinking about how we leverage in some of the predictive model pieces that we talked about yesterday. There may also be some other kind of criteria that we start looking at. But yeah, you can run the progress report campaign report. And again, pull them apart. Like even in the same report, like give me all for this population, save the responded and not responded as a student list, and then run that. All right, well that is early alerts at Western. So hopefully it gives you some things to think about in terms of next steps and where this can go. But overall, I think as we continue to see some engagement and again, an increased response rate, that again continues to help fuel a lot of this work. And as we talked about earlier, it's more so about, the progress report alerts are really where we need them to be outside of the student not attending or never attended, right? That we've now have a new process for that. But again, thinking about some of the other referrals and alert reasons that we can leverage on an ad hoc basis to better support students and connect them with resources. But from a progress report perspective, I think it is truly just let it continue to work kind of in the background, and hopefully we will continue to see this response rate increase. And again, maybe once we dig into some of this piece and separating out those two student populations, we'll actually see some of the, I will say, more nuanced impact of those two.